Stow Great War Aerodrome and a quick look into the collections for you. Something we all hold dear to our heart, a good feed up, food, and that's what we're going to talk about today, or rather the supply of it. Well, nowadays more than ever we all understand the benefits of a good feed up, and therefore from a war point of view, from a combat point of view, the enemy is always going to look to try and restrict your food if it can, because if we think about throughout history, we have used restricting food as a way of punishment. If you think about prisoners being on bread and water, if you think about people who are punished in the army going on half rations back in the day, this is a very quick way to impact on someone and change the way they're thinking. And that psychological impact is vital if you're in a war with somebody. A whole nation can be affected that way. So, as you can imagine, in the Great War, 1914 to 1919, the British government, the War Office particularly, and the Ministry of Food were very reluctant to introduce any kind of restrictions, although really they needed to, and they needed to do it pretty straight away. The island itself was under blockade. We were blockading the Germans and preventing them getting the things they needed, and they were doing it in return. Unfortunately, by 1916, it became very clear that food was starting to run out. So restrictions started to come in. It started out very gently, only being allowed to eat 3 people at a time in a restaurant, only being allowed 1 course in a restaurant, not being allowed to feed pigeons, that sort of thing. But by the end of 1917 into 1918, there were a number of things that meant, yeah, there's no doubt about it, we need to restrict food. We need to restrict it. The Germans, by 1918, had introduced unrestricted warfare, which is where their submarines, their U-boats, were going to torpedo any ship that was travelling to a UK port. Previously, it was only ships that were known to be carrying munitions or warships, so the ones that were directly aiding the war effort. But in 1918, all bets were off. If you were going to the UK, you were going to get torpedoed. As you can imagine, this had a huge impact on our food imports. Thinking ahead, throughout 1917, we started to introduce rationing. Let's start January 1918, which is where these objects we're going to look at come from. We had restricted access to the basic foodstuffs. Bread, which you were allowed 4.5 pounds a week each. Meat, you were allowed 2.5 pounds of meat, of rabbit, poultry, whatever, each per week. And you were allowed 3/4 pound, about 340 grams of sugar per week, per person. And the way it worked was very simple. Once rationing was introduced in a compulsory fashion, you would register your name and your household for ration books. Here we have the ration books of Mr. George Bramwell and his wife Martha. I know it looks like a P, but trust me, it's a G. It is a G. Now, George and Martha registered their selves as householders. We don't know if there was any other family members. The chances are there were. And they were given a number of ration books. These were ration book B. The way the system worked was very simple. Bearing in mind those basic foodstuffs we talked about, you would register with a particular provider, a retailer. And here we have the sugar ticket, the sugar registration document for Martha in this case. And this was with the Riley Co-op in Blackwell. They lived near Alfreton in Nottinghamshire. And they got a number of their things from their co-op. We've only got the sugar ticket here, but they also registered, I can see on the back here, they registered there for the butcher, they registered there for butter and margarine, they registered there for fats, and they registered there for tea. Heaven forbid, we can't run out of tea. The way it worked was remarkably simple. You went in, you made your purchases, you made your selections, and you handed this book to the retailer, and the retailer would then remove coupons or tickets to the level of your purchase. Now, you can see here that some of them have been separated, but also on the back you can see they've been stamped to show they're legitimately been removed, they've not been torn out. This way, everyone was guaranteed a fair meal. Interestingly enough though, the War Office and the Food Office were under no illusions that should the war continue longer than they planned, how long did they think it was going to last, then they might have to introduce rationing for other foodstuffs that they hadn't nominated yet. And here we can see extra spaces. Now, we don't know what they were actually used for there. We don't know what other foodstuff these were actually applied to. But as you can see, they were applied because there's markings off where the ration has been issued. And they referred to particular dates, which you can barely see. They are there, I promise you. Oh, there's an interesting point actually in the back there. If you look, you can see the retailer stamping in the back. Blackwell Co-op. And this one is stamped 8th of July, 1918. I don't know what became of Martha and George Bramwell. I hope they did well. Thanks to their rationing, they would have come out of the war particularly healthy, because when all the mathematics was done at the end of the war, when rationing closed in around 1919 fully, it was shown that the actual nation had only received a 3% drop in energy food intake and a 6% drop in protein intake. I think that says a lot more about how much they ate 100 years ago rather than how good the rationing was. But either way, it was the healthiest our nation had ever been, just in time for the Spanish flu epidemic to run riot throughout the country. The next time the country was as healthy as it was coming out of 1918 was actually during the rationing period of the Second World War, where we applied a lot of these lessons. Anyway, there we go. I hope it's interesting for you. Catch up with us again soon and we'll have some more looks into the collection.